Hello and welcome to a brand new video. I'm sure you've noticed there's a little bit of difference between with me. I have a beard now, or a sort of beard, depends on what you mean by. But there's a very good reason for that, because it's for play, and it's actually more than that. I have tried to trim this. But anyway, that's not the point of this video. Today I've decided to do a video I've been thinking about doing for the last couple of years, and not really sure whether I should have made a top 10 video, but I'm going to do it anyway, and I'm actually going to give you my top 10 worst Doctor Who episodes or stories. Why have I decided to do top 10 now? It's something I've been wanting to talk about, and I think worst stories is always one that people are interested to see or hear my opinions of. A lot of stories on this list bar I've only seen the once, so you'll have to be a little bit lenient with me. Here's the top 10. At number 10 is one that my friend Michael is gonna really hate me for saying and putting in the top 10 stories that not necessarily are ones that I hate. There isn't a Doctor Who story I dislike, but coming in at number 10, it's Twice Upon a Time, our most recent episode of Doctor Who. Why is it that this story resonates with me so badly? Because I think for a lot of things it represented, specifically the first Doctor. It was such a thrill to have David Bradley come in and play the first Doctor. It was something that we wanted him to do since we saw him in Twice Upon a Time. A lot of people were very unsure about how Moffat was going to write the first Doctor, whether he was going to get it how we perceived it, whether it was going to stay true enough, and I don't think it worked. I think a lot of people's experiences are ruined of this story because of how the first Doctor was written, the sexist stuff. And for me, that was something that made this episode very meh. It was a lot of the first Doctor stuff, and it just felt a bit of a flat thing to end on in the Moffat era, especially for Peter Capaldi, who was a fantastic Doctor. At number 9, it's the Ribos Operation, the season 16 opener, the first part of the Key to Time saga with Tom Baker as the Doctor. Why is this story on here? Because it's something that I think a few people have perhaps mentioned, but for me, the Ribos Operation was probably one of the most blankest, uninteresting stories I've seen from Tom Baker's era. It's one I barely remember. I've only seen the once, but every single Doctor Who story, except that one, I think, doesn't really stand. It's the only one that doesn't stand out to me in any form or shape, other than it being Romana's first episode, and we saw that opening sequence with the White Guardian being introduced and the whole concept of the Black Guardian. But other than that, I don't remember what happened in this story. Is it bad for me to be putting it on the worst list? But I think, considering there's everything else, even the others on this list, I remember a lot more about. I think that's why the Ribos Operation goes on here. Obviously I didn't find it that interesting. I have definitely seen it. Coming in at number 8 is a John Pertwee episode. It's the Ambassadors of Death, and I think the thing that ruins it for this episode more than anything else is the fact that it is so long. The first John Pertwee's first season had 3 7-parters, which realistically was a bit full on, and by this point, we had other stories in that season. We had the Doctor and the Silurians. We had that whole Silurian story, which was very interesting to sort of, that had that sort of alien monster, or we had the Inferno was a parallel universe idea, but the Ambassadors of Death felt like it felt a bit flat. It was that middle story that didn't quite have anything interesting. It didn't feel like it had the space ambassadors, and there was like a couple episodes I've completely forgotten what happened, and I will of course add a lot of these entries I haven't seen in a while, so these things might change, but the Ambassadors of Death, it felt like it would have been a good 4-parter, but a 7-parter, it just spread it too thinly, and which is why it's on that list. At number 7 is a half missing story, so I don't know if I should really be putting half missing stories on here, but it is The Crusade, the first Doctor story, the only missing story from season 2. It's missing its 2nd and 4th parts, and I think it suffers very badly for that. I myself have actually sat down and watched obviously the 2 existing episodes 1 and 3, and the audio for episodes 2 and 4, so I can obviously, that's as much as I can see or hear of it. And I feel like I missed so many key moments in the 2nd and 4th parts, and the 1st and 3rd parts were just not that interesting, I think, and that's what really this story suffered compared to something like The Reign of Terror, where episodes 4 and 5 didn't really add too much. But yeah, The Crusade is something of a bit of a blank for me, considering it's from probably one of the strongest seasons from the first 6 years. Season 2 is probably one of my favourites, and it's definitely my favourite Hartnell season. So it just felt like a bit of a standout one to me. That just wasn't good. At number 6, we go back to the new series. We've got Flatline, the series 8, episode 9, 10, 9. Jamie Matheson's second entry into the Doctor Who series, his second Doctor Who story to be broadcast, so I think this was the first one he wrote. Why do I find Flatline so... Why is Flatline quite this high up the list? I think partly because I didn't get the hype. A lot of people really found this episode like one of the best ones for the series. I just didn't get it. The character of Rixie was supposed to be sort of one of the main focuses of the episode, and I didn't quite click with him. Although I will add that his appearance in Face the Raven the following year, I do actually like his character a lot more in that. I think actually his character is really good in Face of the Raven. I just think this first entry for him just didn't quite sit well with me. And after Mummy on the Orient Express, which is one of my favourite episodes, I just felt like it felt very, very flat. Very flat for Flatline. But the idea of the shrinking TARDIS was good, and we had that whole Addams Family moment, and there were some nice little moments in there. Clara taking control, but I think at this point in Clara's history, Clara's sort of storyline is where it starts to get a little bit annoying. That sort of Series 9 vibe started coming from this episode. So I don't know, a lot of elements, a lot of just, and the monsters. Monsters were quite interesting. It just, yeah, I don't know, just didn't really click with me. At number 5, we've got In the Forest of the Night, the following story. 2 consecutive stories. Well, that's going to be a bit of a thing. Series 8 I think was quite good, but In the Forest of the Night, I think a lot of people can agree with me in the fact that it just wasn't that good. It just wasn't that interesting. I think it was just trees. I mean, if the Doctor and Clara and Danny hadn't even been there, the whole story would have resolved itself, which I think is a bad thing for a Doctor Who story. The story needs the Doctor to be, or the companion, or somebody from the TARDIS, or somebody relevant to the story to be the one that resolves the story, rather than not just the Doctor, Clara, and everyone being thrown in the middle of it, having to run around, trying to avoid some wild animals that escaped the zoo, and then the trees saved the Earth, and that was it. I think Frank Cottrell Boyce, who wrote this episode, did better with Smile, the 2017 episode, but for this one it was just uninteresting, and I think when the Doctor isn't really key to any sort of development in the story is where you're missing out. At number 4, we've got The Sunmakers. Well, The Sunmakers is another one of those stories where it just felt like a good idea, but the execution of it wasn't that amazing. I've only seen this story once again, only the once, but when I watched it, I found I got so bored by the whole taxes and the idea of that. I mean, taxes as a thing as a child, especially when you're younger. But I mean, this wasn't something I saw when I was a kid, but it's something that they developed a Doctor Who story around taxes, set on Pluto, which was interesting, but it was very grey, and that was the whole point of the episode. It was supposed to be very grey. The whole idea of everything was all very dreary, which was supposed to sort of like push that element. But I just didn't find, which I mean, it did that well, but that basically meant I found it dreary and uninteresting. The villain was quite, I can't even remember his name. The little thing in the chair that ended up shrinking because it was just all about taxes. I didn't quite get, there was a few little nice moments with Leela from what I remember, but very forgettable, The Sunmakers. So I don't even know why was it called The Sunmakers. I don't see how the story title is relevant, but anyway. At number 3, it's Underworld. Now this is one story which I think it's partly because it was a very mediocre story like The Sunmakers, but I ended up watching it to death. Partly because it is the only Doctor Who story so far I own on DVD twice, and as a VHS. I bought the VHS first off a car boot sale, watched it, found it alright. Then I won the DVD as part of the Myths and Legends box set, which I got from Doctor Who magazine, which first ever competition I won from Doctor Who magazine. So here actually is DVD, which I got with the Horns of Nimon and the Time Monster, both reasonably mediocre-ish stories. I think the Horns of Nimon's one quite good, but Underworld itself was definitely the low point of the 3 stories that they put on that box set, which I rewatched. And then I've been collecting the Doctor Who DVD files, which of course Underworld was released as well, so I own, for a story that is actually my 3rd least favourite story, I have it on DVD twice. So I think that adds to how my dislike to this story, because once again very forgettable. The whole story of the P7E, I think it is, and just based off one of the mythic Myths and Legends. Can't really remember what one it's based on. That's how sort of like forgettable it is as a story. I don't know what else to say. The creatures, the villains were quite. I mean, I have to get the DVD again. The villains were interesting, They had like 3 eyes and a thing, and there's a spaceship that was trying to find another spaceship and recover the memory banks of a species, I think. I don't even know, I have to read this. The minions, that's it. Not those things, no. The minion race, which sounds completely different now in 2018 context. Very forgettable. Definitely not one of my favourites, and it is my least favourite classic story, as the top two are new series stories. At number 2 we've got a story that people are going to agree with very much, one that's had a lot of hate, and I think rightfully so, and that was Hellbent, the Series 9 finale with Peter Capaldi. Why did I dislike it so much? It wrapped up the Gallifrey arc too quickly. I think a lot of people thought the Gallifrey thing should have been not necessarily something for the 50 years, but it was less than 2 years between the Day of the Doctor and Hellbent. And there wasn't really... I think there was a bit more expansion to be done there, and it just felt that was too soon, and that just shouldn't have quite happened. The whole Clara thing, I think Clara as a character's had... I mean, we could talk for days about Clara, but she had 3 good endings, I would say. The Death in Heaven ending, the Last Christmas ending, and the Face of the Raven ending, I would say, are all pretty good endings for her character. But Hellbent wasn't. I think the whole Ashilda going off in their TARDIS, shaped like a diner sort of thing, it just... I think out of the 4 endings, I don't think they could have done any worse. The whole, hey look, it's Gallifrey, oh look, shiny, classic TARDIS console. It's basically like a shiny ball for Doctor Who fans to go, hey look, hey look. That's why I dislike the story. The Doctor went against quite a lot, his whole... A lot of the things he stood for no obvious reason. The hybrid thing was the biggest cop-out in new series history, and I think a lot of people sort of like agree with that. So, and considering kicking off the back of such a good episode, Heaven Sent was so good, but Hellbent just wasn't. So, a lot of those things, and I think, and also now thanks to Twice Upon a Time, going back to my number 10, reason why I didn't mention it just then, but the whole the Doctor forgetting Clara at the end of this episode was probably the only redeeming factor of a lot of the storyline elements of it, and that got written out in Twice Upon a Time just before Stephen left. So Hellbent, I think a lot of people can agree with me on that one. And number 1, now this was definitely not a hard one to pick. It's been my least favourite for a long period of time, and it's probably going to stay like that unless something equally dreadful turns up, and that's Fear Her. Fear Her is probably the closest, and possibly is closest to me actually hating a Doctor Who episode. I don't hate it, but I'm very close to. And it was partly down to owning a DVD. Whenever I get the DVDs, I bought the Series 2 Volume 5, which had the last 3 episodes of Series 2 on it. And the finale, Army of Ghosts and Doomsday, was definitely a story I like rewatching, but I had to watch Fear Her through because for some reason I was a stupid kid and didn't want to skip Fear Her. So I ended up watching a lot of that. I feel no sympathy for the characters in it, the Isolas and Chloe Webber, both sort of the alien and the human character we are supposed to feel for, didn't at all. The whole Doctor Rose relationship by this point was getting on my nerves with the whole Series 2 thing, but that's an entirely different discussion. But yeah, Fear Her is there's not a single story on this list that I dislike enough to not watch again, but Fear Her comes pretty close. It had a good concept, and everything that it was trying to get you to feel for characters and elements, you just didn't, and yeah, it fell flat. And from the fact I saw it quite a lot of times thanks to the Series 2 DVD I got. So, there we go. I'm going to quickly address one thing before I finish, that there will be no honourable mentions, or dishonourable mentions in this case, because it's been really difficult for me to come up with a top 10 story, because a lot of them are so good. Well, Doctor Who is always something I enjoy watching regardless of how bad it can be, because I'm not going to say it's all amazing, because it really isn't. But there's not a single story in this, even in this list, that I wouldn't watch again. Maybe a lot of them only because I'm watching them for marathon type things. But yeah, there isn't a story that's... But then I'm going to quickly address a few things. One thing you'll notice, there's quite a bit of Peter Capaldi on here. I think partly that's down to some of the elements of some of the writing. His era and his Doctor particularly is one of my favourites. Tom's got 3 entries, Tom Baker, who I think is definitely one of he's the definitive Doctor Who. I'm not to say my favourite, but he is probably one of the most loved incarnations, so it's just 3 bad stories in quite 7 years. I mean, not bad at all, really. And yeah, Colin Baker normally gets put on these sort of lists, but none of his stories were something I'd consider bad enough. Even even the two culprits, the Twin Dilemma and Time Flash, are two stories that get really knocked and put on these lists, but okay, once again, only seen them once. But they were never something I watched and go, oh, this is boring. I remember more elements of Twin Dilemma and Time Lash than I do of the Reverse Operation or Underworld. So yeah, the Gunfighters. That was a good story. I've got it here. Gunfighters. People say this is one of the worst ones. I actually really enjoyed it. People are going to probably, hunt me down for that. But a lot of stories that get put on these lists just aren't ones I consider my worst. So do your worst comment section. But all jokes aside, let me know what you think. What are your favourite or least favourite Doctor Who stories down below. I hope this hasn't been too rambly. I've tried to make this a little bit more entertaining. So yeah, let me know what stories you agree with me on, what stories you disagree with me on, what your least favourite ones are, and there will be a follow-up to this. I'm going to record a follow-up, so if I'm wearing the same thing for a few videos in a row, it's because I'm bulk recording. So look out for my top 10 favourites. See you in the next video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and all the rubbish that you hear in every single end of a video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!